So we're live. So thank you so much, Barry, to have accepted my interview request.
No problem.
So for people that are listening to us, I'm with Barry Choi, personal finance blogger at MoneyWeHave. And the first question I have for you, Barry, is how did you fall into the magical how do you say in English, marmite, like the pot of personal finance? What was the element that brought you into this space?
Well, it depends on where you're asking from. If you're asking from how I started to invest, I was always good with my money from a young age. My parents were immigrants to Canada, so they taught me the value of saving and things like that. So when I got my first full-time job, I naturally started to invest right away. And when I say invest, I mean start investing in my retirement, which is basically mutual funds at the time. Now, as far as blogging is concerned,
Okay.
it took me a little bit longer to get there because I started with mutual funds, as I mentioned, and eventually I went to a financial advisor. But later I realized that he was kind of ripping me off, you could say, due to the high MERs and the deferred sales charges that were involved. So I started to blog because I wanted people to learn from my mistakes. I didn't want them to lose their money as I felt I did.
So you're telling that he was ripping you off. So what exactly was he doing? Was he just like selling you mutual funds that had higher fees, like most advisors are doing?
Yeah.
I'm not, or was he doing something that was unethical? I'm not saying it's ethical, but what I'm saying is that like sometimes like people tend to sell you something that maybe have like a 0 point something% more than they should.
Exactly.
So what happened with your advisor exactly?
So in a sense for me, like I understand now, hindsight's a little bit different. Like I understand if you're going to buy a mutual fund that you need to pay a fee. Now you hit it bang on when you say unethical. So this is probably about, I'm trying to think how long ago this is. Probably 8 years ago, 9 years ago, maybe. So at the time I was thinking about buying a home. I don't remember exactly how long it was. Okay. So, my advisor had invested me in these mutual funds, and I was under the impression that I didn't understand what a management expense ratio was or a deferred sales charge. So at the time, I was happy to recommend this advisor to anyone. It's just like, hey, yeah, this guy, he doesn't charge me anything. It's great. It's great. I talked about him on Red Flag Deals. And this random stranger messaged me and said, hey, just so you know, you're definitely paying something. And he explained what an MER was and a DSC fee was. So when I looked into it, he was 100% correct. I was paying an average 2.5% MER, which is fine if it had been disclosed to me. I had no idea that I was paying this. And more importantly, I was being charged a deferred sales charge in the funds that I had. Now, I had told this advisor that I was planning to buy a home, and at the time I was planning to get married. So he kind of knew that I needed this money in a relatively short time, in about 2 years. And he had this in writing. Now, if you know anything about asset allocation and risk tolerances, I'm sure you do, it was very odd to have me in certain mutual funds that were, say, 70% equities. And eventually, when I called him on it, he basically said, well, if you aren't happy with the returns, we can put you in something that's less risky, which had nothing to do with my question. So eventually, I had to escalate it to the management team where, fortunately, they ruled in my case and got all my fees back, and I transferred my funds out of that company.
Oh, wow. So just so everyone understand, the fact that you were looking to buy a house made you, not that you tolerate less risk as a person, but basically since you need your money in a short time, it's not a good idea to take a lot of risk, because if your money diminish on the long run, the stock market tends to do well, but in the span of 2 years, like you don't have time to wait, so you make your money back, right?
Exactly. So as a personal finance blogger, like I understand why people struggle with that, because at the time I had no idea, what risk tolerance to understand. When I talk to a lot of people now these days, they ask me the same questions. Hey, I'm getting married in 2 years, or I'm buying a house in 2 years. The savings accounts are only paying 2% right now. How can I earn a higher return with zero risk? And, it's a joke for people who work in personal finance, but like there's no such thing. If someone promises you, hey, I can get you 10%, 15% in 2 years with zero risk, it's a scam. It's 100% scam. It's just not possible. And people just don't understand why that is, right?
Yeah, so from what I understand, since you left this advisor, you're managing your money yourself?
Yeah, that's right. The funny thing is that, because I found out that he was overcharging me, well, not overcharging, not being truthful, And then that random stranger messaged me and told me to, hey, you should just look into these things. I'm not telling you what to do, but it would be a smart thing to just look into these things. So I started doing my research, and I quickly realized that investing, depending on how you invest, is not very difficult. So I now invest in index funds. As many people know, it's a very simple way of investing. And realistically speaking, I said maybe 5 to 10 hours total a year on it. It took me about 20 to 30 hours to research at the beginning. Actually a huge time investment overall. And more importantly, you do the math, it saves me probably tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars over the course of my 40 years of savings, right?
And were you surprised by some stuff? I mean, so I get that you're a very smart person, and you read about it and you made it your passion. But did you do some rookie mistake switching from being with an advisor, managing your money?
There's always mistakes to be made because anyone who's smart, and it's exciting at the beginning. It's funny because there's all these resources out there. I mentioned the Canadian Couch Potato. There's a reason why he recommends a set portfolio. And every so often, someone comes along, myself included, who thinks they can do better. It's like, I'm going to change this asset allocation. I'm going to add an ETF. I'm going to add something else because I want more exposure to this, or whatever is popular at the time. I remember at the time, the BRIC countries were very, very popular. Brazil, Russia, India, China. Again, this is 8 or 9 years ago. And they did really well for a little while. But if you look at the last few years, Russia, India, and Brazil have not been doing so well. China's still doing all right. But the point is, if it fits your overall strategy, just stick to it and whatever. But don't think you're trying to it's basically what people are trying to do is to time the market. And that's the biggest rookie mistake anyone can make. And at the same time, I've bought certain things just because I've had a feeling or read something about it in the paper. Realistically speaking, it had no purpose in my portfolio. In fact, just last week, I finally sold a position in the Canadian Preferred Shares Index Fund. I held onto it because it was an attractive dividend, and that's what I had read online. But what they forget to tell you online or in newspapers is that the overall value of the ETF can still drop. So even though I was getting a great dividend every single month, I still lost about 25% over the last 3 years. But I held onto it for so long just because I didn't want to sell it. And when I finally realized it has no purpose in my portfolio anymore, I finally pulled the trigger. And the funny thing now is, I feel great. Before I was thinking about it almost every day. Now it's just like, it's gone. It doesn't matter anymore. It's gone, right?
So I think that you invest mostly in ETF, but do you own any stocks, individual stocks of companies?
Yeah. So when I first started to invest, I owned a few individual stocks, just Canadian financials, energy, and I also had some telecom stock. I work for a telecommunications company, so I do own some of their stock. But again, it came down to how much time was I willing to invest, and I found that I was just spending too much time reading about stocks. It wasn't something I really enjoyed. Although I liked managing my money, I preferred using ETFs and TDE series just because it was so much easier to invest, and it allowed me to do other things that I enjoy instead.
So what are those other things?
Well, obviously now I'm a freelance writer. I blog. I like to travel, or it's just something as simple as watching TV at home. As you get older, you have a lot less free time, and I don't like to spend my time on these things that, it's true. Maybe I choose a winner in the stocks and I hit it rich, but there's just as much of a chance as taking a loss. I'd rather just get the average and be happy with what I'm getting, knowing that if my saving habits are good, which I have a high savings ratio, I'm going to be fine in retirement. I can just do whatever. And more importantly, at the same time, any money that I spend, it's not a big issue because I know I'm already saving for my retirement.
So what was your savings ratio?
I haven't calculated it since I bought my condo, but before then I was over 50%. But it's easy for me to say that because fortunately there's a dual income situation. It's my wife and I, and I've always been raised with good savings habits, and I probably have an above average salary. So it's not apples to apples when you compare it to everyone else. But I've always had the discipline, more importantly, to pay myself first. That's what I think is most important.
Oh, you deserve some credit here. I mean, I feel no matter how much you earn, there's and it was studied in scientific paper, people tend to spend everything they can, and there's kind of no limit to which, I mean, maybe there is, maybe if you're a billionaire, you can't spend what you make, but I feel it's as hard to save money now that I mean, now I'm not making any money at this specific moment, but let's say last year when I had a good paying job. It was as hard saving than when I was doing 2 times less. So I think discipline is important, and there's no excuse. I mean, maybe there is in some cases, but it's always hard, I think.
Oh yeah, it's tricky, and that's why I always pay myself first. So regardless of what my pay is, right away I started at saving 25%. Well, I started at 10% at the very beginning because I wasn't making much money. But it's mainly a lifestyle inflation thing. So I always recommend people, once you start making more money, you should up your savings every single time. So, when I got my first job, it was very basic, mid-30s. But as soon as I got a raise, I actually upped my savings rate at the exact same time. So my savings increased, but my lifestyle inflation did not. Now, don't get me wrong. Eventually, I bought a car, I got married, and there's these other things.
Yeah.
But more importantly, you just budget for it. So as I said, I like to set aside X amount every single month. So, savings are automatically into my Trello, to my retirement, to my President's Fund. So the way I look at it is any money I have left over, then I can spend it. It's no big deal because all the savings is already taken care of. So yes, there's a certain amount of discipline involved, but if you make savings on max, then there's actually no discipline required.
And I have a question for you, Barry. So like you told me why you got into the personal finance verticals, because like you realized that something went wrong with your advisor and you wanted to take the matter into your own hands. But how did you went into it? Was it like there was a first blog post after this event, or like this? Did you decide? Because now I feel like a significant portion of what you make come from your brand as a personal finance blogger. So how
it's a bit tricky. So becoming a do-it-yourself investor was just a natural step. It was thank you that the random stranger messaged me was a certified financial planner. So I got lucky. His name's Marcus Muse, and he's based in Edmonton. And he's still a good friend to this day, but it helps that there's a lot of good people out there that are willing to help. So I learned on my own, and then the blog just came later because, like I said, I wanted people to learn from my mistakes. I had a little bit more free time about 3 years ago, so I started to blog just for myself, again, and for my friends. People were always asking me the same questions. We talked about, hey, where should I invest my down payment? Well, if everyone's asking me the same question, I just wrote a post about it and I just send them a link, right? Or what is management expense ratio? What is compound interest? Same idea. I wrote a blog post and I go, hey, here you go. Just read this. I don't need to explain it every single time to multiple people. And eventually it grew into a business. I didn't plan to do it that way, but at the same time, it just kind of worked out. I have formal media training, so it allowed me to network a little bit better. I've got a formal journalism background, so I had those writing skills, but I never really thought about it as a freelance perspective until people started to message me. Because what happened is, because of the blog, people found that, hey, this guy can write, this guy can work for me. So they actually approached me at first. So I wasn't looking for clients at the beginning. They found me, and then eventually I was like, hey, if I want to make more money, I can look for clients. Do you know what I mean? You're basically, how much you make on the side depends on how hard you want to hustle, right?
Yeah. So I have a question for you. Like, a lot of people I talk to are like, I'd like to do DIY investing. I would like to do that, but I'm so scared of the numbers. And I look at those, I don't know, like annual report or market watch or whatever, and I'm so scared. So like, what was how did you went to go from being someone who doesn't know much about financial market to become kind of an expert? Like, and I know you didn't study this at the university, so that's interesting.
Yeah.
Listening, like how can you go from being a noob to becoming like an expert?
Yeah, nice thing about being an investor, you don't need to know the microorganisms of every single thing that's out there. I mentioned index investing, which is a passive way of investing where you can invest in the entire market. Unfortunately, there's a lot of good resources out there. So I started with some basic books to get you started. There's quite a few personal finance books that you should start. The Millionaire Teacher is one of my favorites. There's actually a new edition coming out in a few weeks by Andrew Hallen. He's a great one. There's The Wealthy Barber, Bruce Sellery, right? Mulala, and then Preet Banerjee wrote a great book also. So there's a few resources to get you started. But what you'll notice in a lot of these books is they all have very similar themes, and they tell you what to invest in if you're the lazy investor that we talked about. And in reality, I'm a bit lazy, so it's easy for me to invest. So after reading all these resources, you realize that it's really not that hard. I'm not tracking stocks every single day. I just set up the accounts, I set those autumn payments, and it's done. And once a year, I rebalance. And if you're afraid of the numbers, there's even Excel sheets online where you can just punch in your own numbers and it tells you what to do for you. There's literally these step-to-step guides all over the place. It's really not that difficult these days.
So is it on your blog, this thing you're talking about, or somewhere else?
No, they're all over the place. So the Canadian Couch Potato is one big one. But honestly, there's so many other great resources out there that I don't put it on my own blog. It's like people have already written about it. There's no point in me competing with them. It's like, give them the credit that they deserve. I learned from them, and they should have the clicks going their way.
Okay, so thank you so much, Barry. Before ending this interview, I just want to ask you a question that is quite personal. So I don't want you to get angry at me or anything, but since the mission of Hard Bacon is kind of to try to break the taboo of money, I wanted to ask you, like, how much did you make last year? And feel free to say no. I mean, I want you to reveal me this information, but like, so how much did you make?
I make above the average Canadian, but that's also because I have a full-time job and 2 side hustle jobs. So how much I make every year, it depends on how hard I work.
Yeah, you seem to be working pretty hard. Congrats.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Barry. It was great having you.
Okay, anytime.